This is my Rockwall Murphy bed. Here's the controller for it. It's on a 120. Here's the Rockwall pieces. This is all plywood here. There's the Hoist. I bought that on Harbor Freight. It was like 50 bucks, really cheap. I have my wiring going across. I need to conceal that. Here is my latch that holds the wall up. And on the bottom, I have this on hinges. I have 1, 2, 3 hinges. So instead of a mount here, which a lot of Murphy beds have, they have a pin going here and then the whole thing rotates on that. This rotates off the hinges, which is a good thing because all the weight of the bed goes down to the floor instead of on you know, like a hinge here. When the bed comes down, I put down some wood here. I could make it nicer, but I put the wood down. It's really simple. I also have to put a piece of wood here. That way the bed is sitting on the wood. If I don't put a piece of wood there, then the weight is sitting on the hinge. Here's the hoist at work. Now you'll notice that the piece of metal that the pulleys are on rocks. Initially I didn't like that. I wanted everything to be very steady, very stiff. But when the hoist is on or off, I noticed that it works like a spring. So it's actually helping to maintain smoothness. And that's a 1/4 inch thick bar that I actually bent it I bent it on accident because the weight was bouncing back and forth and it actually bent it, and I was afraid I was going to have to add another bar there, but it ended up turning into a spring, and so far it's not shearing. The metal is not shearing anywhere, so it's working out pretty well. And the hoist, I had to add some brackets there as well into the wood. That's a wood beam. It's about 3-4 inches thick, so it can hold the screws and everything. And the hoist is at 110, 220, which means right now I have one line coming down and then 2 lines making a loop back. And that, when I make the loop, it gives me the 220 pounds that I can pull. If I only had one single line coming down into the bed, then I could only use 110. So this bed weighs about, with all the stuff on it, weighs about 80 to 90 pounds. One odd thing is the bed, as you can see, is crooked, That's because the lines are over here. So here's my pulleys over here. That's one pulley that I mounted. I also added in a steel reinforcement bar along my frame. I'll take that off now. Oops, and here's my latch. I just need to paint it. Here you go. I'm going to take off the bed. Under the bed I have I think it's a 1/8 piece of wood, plywood. Looks like plywood. That to fit. I could have nailed that down, but I prefer to be able to get to the underlying pieces. So here's underneath the plywood. Well, it's 1/8 plywood, whatever you want to call it. So you'll notice my framing, my 2x4 framing here is flat. It's not like you'd normally see it for support. Usually it's like this, but I have it like this. The depth of this from here to here perfectly matches the depth of my cabinet, and that's why I had to do the framing flat instead of like a normal wall. I could have made the cabinet deeper, and then I could have flipped the plywood, the 2x4s. The frame around the edges here, that's an IKEA bed frame. It was an IKEA bed frame. I basically gutted it and chopped it all down. Here's the pulley, the single pulley on the bottom. This actually came with the Harbor Freight Hoist. There's a setup. These two pulleys come from garage door opener kit. And here's my setup in the back. Underneath here is a frame that I mounted to the wall using concrete bolts, so this thing won't lift up on me, so I had it concrete bolted in. There's the I actually added some wood here. The bed, when it folds down, folds flat onto this piece of wood so that all the weight is transferred down. Otherwise you'd have all the weight transferred onto the hinge, and then it would rock back and forth even if you're at your top, even if you're at your vertical position. Here's a couple of the climbing mounts. So when I installed those, I made sure I used the torque wrench to put them in. If you overdo it, you'll strip them. If you underdo it, then they'll be loose. Here's how I frame the edge. You want this pulley to match up with your bottom pulley. Otherwise you end up with the hoist trying to pull down or trying to pull up. So this line here goes exactly horizontal. That way it's pulling directly into this pulley at the bottom. This hoist has an automatic shut-off if you route this stuff correctly, but unfortunately I couldn't do it because of my layout. There were more expensive hoists that I could have added something, but $50 versus hundreds of dollars, you know, it just adds up. And when I pull the bed up, the hoist will keep pulling until I stop it myself. If you go too far, you'll push the entire wall in, and then you'll start really working on that hoist. You can burn out the motor if you keep pulling it. So you've got to be careful when you bring up the bed. You've got to have just a tiny bit of play in there. And then you'll see on this side I have a gap. I still have a little gap here. So that's what I need to push up here. And the other reason I have it pulling out like that is because the depth of the cabinet is slightly less. So what's happening is the bed is compressing as I pull it in, and so it still works out fine. And then I put my latch up here, and then that's solid. And I've put my weight on this. I'm about 160 pounds, and kids who are about 80 can climb up this no problem, and there's no movement at all. So again, there's the hinges. I need to paint this, but it's fine. So the hinges are flat, and then the padding, as you can see here, that's the gap. So you've got the plywood framing, then you've got this piece of wood that's attached to the bed framing, and that adds the space that's required to make sure that the weight is not on the hinge. And you want the weight on the bed instead.